With summer winding down, it's the perfect time to refresh your style for fall. And Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead. Discover top brands like Free People, Favorite Daughter, Reformation, Mother, and Veronica Beard. Plus the latest trends, everyday essentials, and beauty must-haves you'll reach for again and again. It's easy too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores and at Nordstrom.com.
Residents at Brightview Senior Living Communities enjoy enhanced possibilities, independence, and choice. Brightview Dulles Corner in Herndon and Brightview, Great Falls, offer vibrant senior independent living, assisted living, and memory care services through various daily programs and cultural events. Chef-prepared meals, safety and security, transportation, resort-style amenities, and high-quality care. Everything you need is here. Discover more at brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal housing opportunity.
Hello and welcome to episode number 282 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to thank some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Beth Haindages, Sammy Kay, Leah, Mark Collins, and Charlie the Tooth Fairy. For some context about Charlie the Tooth Fairy, right? Charlie, if I think this is the same person, responded to one of my Instagram Q&As. And she was like, I really like the podcast. I listen when I'm in my garage because I make teeth in my garage. And I was like, well, now I need to know all about that because that's a wild thing to say. So as it turns out, Charlie makes like not synthetic teeth. You know what I mean? Like false teeth in her garage, basically. Which is still pretty crazy, to be honest, and I love it. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you all and I appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, is Weapons. Weapons was released in 2025. It has 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb and 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. When all but one child from the same class mysteriously vanish on the same night at exactly the same time, a community is left questioning who or what is behind their disappearance. Kids, 2025 has been a good year for horror so far. We've had Sinners, we've had 28 Years Later, we've had Bring Her Back, and now we have Weapons. And this was so fun. And I'm glad this year has been so good for big horror films that aren't formulaic. They're not relying on cheap jump scares. We're not looking at that Hollywoodized kind of, dot to dot, colour by numbers type of horror. Like people are thinking about things, thinking about reworking old stories, thinking outside the box, and I am here for it. This film is really fun to watch, and it is a bit of a wild ride, to be honest. And I'll say, if you're somebody who really struggles with like really supernatural, terrifying, edge of your seat kind of horror, then this film might be one for you to watch. Because it is fun and it's a bit of a wild ride, and it's also funny. Like, it's engaging and entertaining without being absolutely horrifying. And I mean, the concept is great. It's exactly 2:17 a.m. when all of these children in the one class go missing. And all we see of their disappearance is footage of them running with their arms outstretched on various Ring cameras, just leaving the houses and running. That's all that we see. And you know what? That's a great premise. It's a great setup, right? And there's only this one little kid left in the class, and nobody knows why he's been the one that's left behind. And it is the type of film that we get straight into. We're straight into these kids have disappeared. What are we going to do about it? And the villain, monster, antagonist, supernatural entity, whatever you want to call it in this film, has been one of my favourite horror films in ages. And I can't actually explain to you why. If you've watched it, you will understand exactly why I loved this horror film. And if you do watch it, you will also understand exactly why. But if I tell you anything about it, it will ruin the story, and I don't want to do that. It was the most original, but also simple horror villain that was very well designed that I have seen in a very long time. And if you kind of break it down to the bones of the story, again, which I'm not going to say too much about because it is just out in cinemas, I don't want to ruin it for people. But if you break it down to the very, very bones of the story, what happens to those children and what happens to subsequently, other people besides those children is genuinely petrifying. It is terrifying. And when you really, really break it down and think about it, you go, oh, this is a horrible concept. And I really appreciated the fact that they took a really simple, age-old story and gave it a distinctive modern twist. So it didn't feel like you were watching a story that has, realistically been rehashed a bazillion times. It felt like I was watching something really new and really fresh. There's a little boy in the story, like I said, who gets left behind, and he is fantastic in it. I thought he did incredibly well. I thought the reality for his character was terrifying and was devastating. And I also liked how we meet lots of different characters in this. So we're sort of told the story from various characters' perspectives. And I really appreciated how the characters were all nuanced and actually deeply flawed, because that's human. It's human to be flawed. And it doesn't work, I think, when you write horror characters that are either perfect or purely bad. It's very difficult to write that. And I think when you write humans that are flawed and nuanced and they aren't just black and white, then you end up with a much richer story. And I really did think that the writers did this very well in this film. Like, you don't want to watch two-dimensional characters. I want to see what's going on in characters' lives and why they behave the way that they do. And actually, this film, even though the subject matter is so dark, you've got all these kids that have disappeared and nobody knows why, and you're watching the kind of fallout in the community of these kids disappearing. Despite all of that, it's actually really funny. Like, it's genuinely laugh out loud funny. There is a chase sequence at the end which really tickled me. I really enjoyed it, and I've been quoting bits of it ever since. But here's where I'm about to say something that seems to be quite controversial in the conversation surrounding this film. Fundamentally, it's good, it's entertaining, I enjoyed it. But is it this like flawless, perfect horror film of the last 10 years, like everybody's talking about? I personally don't think so. I think there's been a huge amount of hype around this film, and I don't think it's fully justified. Is it good? Absolutely yes. Is it as amazing as people have said? I don't think so. So fundamentally, like I said, they took a very simple story that is, tale as old as time, true as it can be, and they gave it a distinctive modern twist, right? But I did feel like there were elements of filler in there to pad out the runtime, Like, I loved the fact that we got the different points of view of various characters throughout the story, but I did think some elements of that were superfluous. I'm not entirely sure that they added anything to our understanding of the story or our understanding of why characters did what they did. And I think that the writers did really well, right, to take an age-old story and spice it up a bit, like I said. But once I realised what was happening, there wasn't really any mystery and therefore suspense driven by the mystery anymore. I also, and this is very, very personal to me, right? I fundamentally, on a deep level, hate dream sequences in horror films. I just find it very annoying. And there's quite an extended dream sequence in this film, which is sort of saved a little bit by the character waking up and then going, what the fuck? As in, like, what the fuck was that? Because I was thinking it too. I was like, this better add something to the story. It didn't. And again, it just sort of felt like filler. And look, this film is great. It's really good fun. It is not by any means a bad film. I just don't think it's as good as all the hype would have you believe. I think it's absolutely worth going to see. And I think that it is a really fun film to watch with a group of people. I think this year there's been a lot of hype around a lot of horror films. Like I've said, there was a huge hype around Sinners. 28 years later, bring her back. And I think we're seeing that with this film, but I don't think this film merits it in the same way. But I do still think it's great. And for me, it was a 4-star film. Well worth watching. Go and enjoy it. Enjoy one of the best horror villains that I've seen in ages. And frankly, a horror villain that we should all aspire to be like.
Meet the Defender 110, a vehicle built for the modern explorer. With on-road presence and off-road prowess, it's naturally capable and expedition-ready. A raised hood, sculpted grille, and durable exterior make it look tough, because it is. Inside, 5-seat comfort comes standard with an option for 7. Navigate any terrain confidently with 3D surround cameras and the intuitive Pivi Pro infotainment system. There's a Defender for every journey, 90, 110, or 130, which boasts room for up to 8. Design your Defender 110 at LandRoverUSA.com. That's LandRoverUSA.com.
This is Hannah Burner from Giggly Squad. O-Pill is the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Let's be real, getting a birth control prescription is not always easy, and it's so much admin. In fact, about a third of women face barriers to access prescription birth control. Between scheduling appointments, missing work, class, or just trying to exist, it's a lot. But now O-Pill is putting birth control in our control. O-Pill is a daily birth control that's FDA approved, full prescription strength, and estrogen free, and 98% effective when used as directed. Grab it online or at most major retailers, no prescription or doctor's appointment needed. So if you're thinking about birth control, check out O-Pill to see if it's right for you. Use code GIGGLY for 25% off your first month of O-Pill at OPILL.com. That's code GIGGLY at OPILL.com. Birth control in your control. We love to see it.
With summer winding down, it's the perfect time to refresh your style for fall. And Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead. Discover top brands like Free People, Favorite Daughter, Reformation, Mother, and Veronica Beard. Plus the latest trends, everyday essentials, and beauty must-haves you'll reach for again and again. It's easy too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores and at Nordstrom.com.
Residents at Brightview Senior Living Communities enjoy enhanced possibilities, independence, and choice. Brightview Dulles Corner in Herndon and Brightview, Great Falls, offer vibrant senior independent living, assisted living, and memory care services through various daily programs and cultural events. Chef-prepared meals, safety and security, transportation, resort-style amenities, and high-quality care. Everything you need is here. Discover more at brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal housing opportunity.
Which brings us to our story this week. Again, this is another well-requested story, so I'm just going to dive right in. In between the old, sprawling trees and the pristine water fountains of Chatham County, North Carolina, lies a dark and deadly secret. Well, perhaps it's more accurate to call it a tantalizing mystery rather than a plain old secret. No one can really explain why this particular mystery is the way that it is. All we know for certain is that it has been that way for centuries. About 10 miles away from Siler City, to the west of Chatham County, is a well-trodden path. At least that's what it appears to be at first glance. Following this path off into the thick, secluded woods of North Carolina will bring you to a clearing. At first, this clearing, a perfect circle about 40 feet wide in diameter, is seemingly just an ordinary clearing. When walking through it, one could believe that it is just a camping ground or maybe a meeting spot, maybe even just a patch of forest where paths meet and wild animals frequent to find something to eat and safety for the night. But the devil's tramping ground is anything but ordinary. Within the circle of dark, muddy earth, nothing grows. And I mean absolutely nothing. And it isn't because of the sheer number of people or the animals passing through the clearing. It's because something or someone simply won't let anything grow there. No plants survive in that perfectly circular patch of land. Seeds sown there will simply not sprout. Perfectly healthy plants that were growing in the forest just outside of the circle wither away and die when transplanted inside it. But why, I hear you asking? I promise I have something that resembles an answer, but bear with me just for a moment. The first settlers in Chatham County back in the 18th century began talking about a curse. But obviously scientists were less than impressed with that explanation. They were on site as early as the 1940s, determined to come up with a rational reason as to why no plant survived the week in the Devil's Tramping Ground. The closest they got was determining that the soil inside the circle was completely barren. Why it's barren, they can't say. And why it has remained that way for centuries, well, they have no clue about that either. The Devil's Tramping Ground just is, and I don't know about you, but that's starting to sound like a curse to me. But there's also more to that patch of land than just the rumours of a dreaded and deadly curse. There's also centuries worth of folklore, history and experiences to take into consideration as well. The first documented account of something mysterious going on at that circle comes from the Chatham County Deed Book from 1784, shortly after Chatham County was originally founded. What is now known as the Devil's Tramping Ground was simply listed as the Poison Field Tract. Poison, I'm assuming, because nothing would grow there, and people back then didn't have much in the way of explanation as to why nothing would grow there in the first place. All they really needed to know was that a patch of land was no good for growing crops or herbs, or just being in any way useful for helping them survive in the untamed wilderness of North Carolina. But with that entry into the deed book, we have proof that people all the way back in 1784 were aware of the circle. But even they weren't exactly sure what they'd stumbled across. A newspaper article from 1882 referenced the Native American tribes who still lived in the area and how they, quote, have all a superstitious dread of the place. The journalist then went on to describe how he managed to hire a Native American to take him out to the Poison Field Tract, and what happened after. It was with difficulty, he wrote, that I succeeded in getting one of them to visit the place with me for the purpose of digging into it. After getting about 3 feet and finding nothing, he was so impressed with the supernatural origin that he refused to go any further. That was it then. Officially, the poisoned field had morphed into a place of otherworldly origins. It was like the paths, carved out in the old world back in Europe by the fairies. The circle of mushrooms they would leave behind as a portal to their realm. It was like the strange landmarks and dusty, dry circles that sprout overnight to signal where one world meets the other. The Old North State, the journalist signs off, is not without its curiosities. Another article published later that year retold accounts from older family members and the generations who had survived into their grand old years in Chatham County. Many of these people had visited the circle when they were children. Many of them had recently visited again, only to find that the place hadn't changed in nearly a century. Nature moves slowly, but then again it really doesn't. A garden left untended can grow from perfectly manicured to totally wild in a matter of weeks. An untouched plot of land should, in theory, blossom into untamed forest land in far less than a century. And yet the poisoned field in North Carolina remained perfectly circular and perfectly dead. And it possibly had been that way for much longer than just a few centuries. So the stories go. The land, which had originally belonged to the Native American tribes of North Carolina, was a sacred place where they performed ceremonial dances. So maybe that would explain why the patch of land where nothing grows is a perfect circle, as many tribes perform their ceremonial dances in a circular pattern, and can sometimes use these dances to clear patches of land to set up their homes and villages. It explains the shape, but it doesn't explain why nothing has grown on the land since. According to legend, what is now known as the Devil's Tramping Ground was once the scene of an epic battle between warring Native American tribes. Both sides faced major losses, and the blood of the fallen warriors is said to have soaked the earth, making it barren. Some say that ever since then, no plants have been able to survive inside the circle. Some say the spirits of old are still in mourning. According to some versions of the stories, one of the warriors killed inside the circle was the chief of one of the tribes. His death sent both his people and the spirits of his ancestors into mourning, which is why no plants can survive in the earth where he lost his life. Another version of the tale says that the gods kept the place of his death clear out of respect to him and the sacrifice that he made. It's believed that the fallen chief's tribe fled the land and ended up on the Outer Banks, where they became the Croatoan people, who helped the legendary colonists who mysteriously vanished from the Roanoke colony in 1586. An article in 1905 lends some credibility to legends surrounding the circle. We visited a much greater wonder, author and journalist G.W. Pascal wrote, which presents some phenomenon which is also ascribed to his satanic majesty and known as the Devil's Tramping Ground. There is a legend that a Native American chief is buried here, and the chief's tribe brought in earth in blankets from beyond Deep River and planted it in wire grass. This is probably a true story, for with my knife I dug up some of the earth in the circle. The soil within the circle, Pascal then writes, was bluish, clayey-looking earth that is markedly different, so it is evident that the earth was brought here. The soil within the circle is different, that's what the article says. That's what the scientists were somewhat able to prove, but we still don't know exactly how or exactly why. Brought in by a Native American tribe, contaminated by radiation from UFO landings, a natural occurring salt lick that kills off plant life, all have been used as reasons to explain why nothing grows within the Devil's Tramping Ground. But now, I believe that we've danced around the topic for long enough. It's time we talked about the devil. With those settlers arriving in North Carolina during the 18th century came tales, stories, and very real fears about the devil. When looking at the poison field tract that seemed to kill off anything planted within it for no reason, those settlers came up with an explanation of their own. Or maybe they were simply looking for an explanation that would make sense of what they were seeing and hearing go bump in the night. The Devil's Tramping Ground gets its name from its nightly visitor. According to the folklore, the devil climbs up from hell every night, concocting his new plans to tempt and corrupt humanity. There, in his sacred space, he will shed the disguises and masks he wears when approaching men and women and walks in his true form. He paces around in a circle, the heat and sulphur from his cloven hooves burning away the plant life around him and poisoning the soil. And he plots, and he plots, and he becomes enraged over foiled plans. In his anger, he will knock aside anything left in his path. Anything from a fallen tree to a tin cup will be pushed from the circle by daybreak. There are many places named after the devil, particularly in North Carolina, but the Devil's Tramping Ground is different. For centuries, people have tested the circle and the devil said to roam within it. They've left things on his land and come back the following day to see that they have angrily been flung to the side of the clearing. Most view this as proof that the stories around the circle are true. Most take it as a warning to stay clear and protect their souls. But others have left items of value in the hopes of striking up a deal with the devil himself. I can't say for certain if those attempts to bargain with the Dark Lord were ever successful, But those who visit the circle report feeling a great sense of unease. They say that the forest around them will go quiet, like a predator is stalking the trees. And they say that they are overcome with the feeling that they are being watched. And then, of course, there are the stories from those brave enough to risk staying out on the Devil's Tramping Ground overnight. An article from the 1930s briefly described what happened to a hunting party caught out in the woods when Lucifer went stomping. There is a story current, the article reads, of how raccoon and possum hunters and their dogs have been on more than one occasion chased from the vicinity of the Devil's Tramping Ground by a ferocious beast said to resemble a black bear. It's known that dogs in particular will often refuse to go near the circle and will duck their heads, tuck their tails, and whimper whenever brought close. Perhaps they can sense the devil is near. Perhaps they can sense that something is not quite right. Perhaps they can see things that we cannot. Paranormal investigators have made several experiments on the site, including one that seemed to capture a mysterious fog with seemingly no origin that moved through the woods and hovered over the blackened area of the Devil's Tramping Ground. They have recorded temperature drops and wild temperature fluctuations, even in the summer, when the forest outside the circle stays at a steady temperature. And then there are the accounts from witnesses saying that they have seen what appear to be spirits combing the paths towards the circle. These spirits are often seen at night and glow with a light all their own, even when the forest around them and the path that they are on is completely pitch black. One of these spirits that is seen the most seems to be a young girl. She will dart ahead on the path and will suddenly run off into the woods. Often those who have seen her say that the forest will then go completely quiet and they will be overcome by an incredible feeling of dread. Then suddenly they will hear a voice coming from the trees, warning them all to run away. Those brave enough to linger report seeing flashing lights and hearing eerie, unexplainable sounds. Most leave when the overwhelming feeling that they are not welcome becomes too much to bear. It is said that anyone who ventures into the Devil's Tramping Ground at night and sees the devil's true face all lose their minds before daybreak. But, as ominous as that sounds, it does appear that the devil is losing. What was documented as being a 40-foot wide poisoned field tract in 1784 now measures about half of that today. After centuries of death, life is finally creeping back into the Devil's Tramping Ground. For the most part, it's just grass and other hardy forest vegetation that is growing on the outer edges of the circle. But that's more than what could survive there, even 100 years ago. Maybe the devil has lost his touch. Maybe the modern world has moved too far away from his reach. Maybe he's changed along with the times and has found a new stomping ground in places like the dark corners of the web. But even though this plot of land is dwindling, the legend of the devil and his secret lair have lived on. It has inspired stories, been the focus of hundreds of books and scientific investigations, and even inspired the 2022 Jonathan Landau movie called The Devil's Stomping Ground. The real-life circle in the forest, however, now rests squarely on private property. The Owens family have officially owned the land for over 100 years and have passed it down through the family line for generations. Maybe it was their good work that made the plotting and stomping more difficult for the devil. The Owens family have a great respect for the circle, though rumour has it that they refuse to visit it alone at night. One of them, a man named Robert Bobby Dowd Jr., even hosted a small music festival there in 1978. But since then, the family has actually tried to keep more of a distance between themselves and whatever happens in the forest at night. Those wishing to test their mettle against the Dark One are allowed to visit if they get permission from the family first. Some are even allowed to camp overnight. But the Owens family expect visitors to be respectful of the land, the wildlife, and the history that surrounds such a mysterious and deadly location. There is something about stories like this that absolutely speak to my childhood. I love a mystery, a natural mystery, and all of these stories grow up around this natural mystery. Now, I'm not saying there's not paranormal shit going on, you know, but it's like, and I tell this story all the time on the podcast, but it always blows my mind, the story of the Valley of the Mad in the southwest of Ireland, where there was this well that people used to go to cure their madness for years and years and years. It was like a legend, a story, a folk tale that you could cure your madness by going to the Valley of the Mad and drinking the water. And then in more recent years, scientists were like, I wonder if there's any truth in this. And they, you know, explored what was in the water in the well, and it turned out to be naturally incredibly high in lithium. So people were actually, for a period of time, being cured of their madness, because lithium is often used in the treatment of mental health conditions, even still to this day. I love that story because it demonstrates the fact that people were aware of this, but they didn't have the science or the language to explain why something was happening, but they knew that it was happening. So you talk about it in a kind of magical way because that's all you know. And if you look up pictures of the Devil's Tramping Ground, like, it's a pretty unassuming patch of land, realistically. Like, if I stumbled across it, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, this is definitely magical in some way. However, for people who are trying to set up communities, etc., every bit of land counts. So it would have been very unusual for nobody to be able to grow anything on this piece of land. They would have been like, why the heck can we not grow anything? Like, we know enough about land to know about soil and what grows best where. That's not like new or unrecorded information. And it's interesting they call it the poison field. And I like that this isn't a modern legend, right? We often have these modern stories that then have historical significance ascribed to them, which isn't necessarily true. So, you know, you'll hear a story of a haunted house and somebody will say, it was built on a Native American burial ground, you know, which is a common horror trope, which actually is, you know, fundamentally quite problematic. But in this story, we have documents all the way back to 1784 talking about this poison field where, you know, nothing will grow and nobody quite knows why. And obviously, there could be a very rational, natural, scientific explanation for it. And, you know, obviously I mentioned some of the theories, like soil was imported, that it's just a natural kind of contamination, there's radiation or high salt content, all of those things, totally understand that they might be real things. But I do feel like if there was a definitive answer, that scientists would have figured it out by now. You know what I mean? That they would have gone, oh, it's actually just the salt content is way too high in the soil and that's why nothing will grow. I also think it's interesting that it is starting to grow now. Like, why now? What has changed? And I do think it's tricky to talk about Native American legends. Like, I don't live in America and I am obviously not Native American. So I think that a lot of links to Native American legends kind of maybe can err on being problematic. You know what I mean? Like I said earlier about Native American burial grounds and it being a problematic trope in horror films. And I've spoken about this before on the podcast. And there are loads of articles out there about why the Native American burial ground haunting trope is problematic and frankly offensive. Not least of all because it suggests that fundamentally Native American burial grounds or battlegrounds or whatever are, you know, evil or can call forth these demonic beings, which suggests that Native American spirituality is fundamentally evil at its core, right? Which is, it's just harmful, it's not good. And I would suggest reading some articles about it online. Like, it is really interesting. It's a thing that when you are not part of a culture that you wouldn't think twice about, and then you read about it from a person within that culture's perspective, and you go, oh, actually, yeah, I see why this is difficult. Now, listen, that's not to say that this particular land was not a sacred ceremonial land, that it was not the site of a bloody tribal battle, or that it has links to the Croatoan people, right? That is not me saying that those things aren't true, and how dare anybody talk about Native American legends and Native American lore. Not in the slightest. But I do think it's important to be mindful about how folklore has sprung about, you know, whether or not it is true Native American folklore that has been, you know, told by Native American people, or whether or not it is the product of settlers and settler ideas about Native Americans. But what I do appreciate is we've got stories here where, you know, you've got Native American people who are like, yeah, we don't like it. We don't like the land. We don't trust it. It's not good. And white settlers alike who are like, oh, you know what, dogs won't go into the circle. We're seeing weird shit. We're hearing things. Items left in the circle are being thrown around or moved by the morning. And also, you know, the Native Americans talked about this big black bear-like creature that was knocking around in the circle. And actually, you know, when you were not from that culture, you kind of reference things based on what you know. So I can see how this turned into devil folklore, right? Because if you've got this big black beastly entity that is roaming this circle, and then you arrive on this land and you're like, well, what could it possibly be? We don't know anything about Native American folklore, so we're going to link it to what we know, which is the devil coming up at night, walking in circles, you know, plotting things and burning, scorching the land. I do love the idea that the devil, who is the prince of darkness, who is this powerful entity, who is the epitome of the antithesis of good on earth, that he spends his nights stomping around in a circle in North Carolina, just being angry and bitter about the things that have gone wrong throughout his day. And I think in some way we can all relate to that. Do I fundamentally think that the devil appears in North Carolina at nighttime and stomps around plotting the demise of humanity? No, I don't think so. Do I think that probably something weird is going on in that patch of land? Absolutely, yes. Whatever that is, I don't know. And I think it's interesting that, you know, part of this legend is if you leave something in the circle, it'll be moved by morning. Like, I wonder what, if that is true, if that is happening and not just part of, you know, the legend and folklore that has grown up around this particular place. If that is true, what is happening there, you know? And I feel like this is the type of place where, you know, eventually scientists will figure out something that will make them go, that's where all these legends have come from. That's why. Like with the Valley of the Mad and the lithium in the water, that there will be, you know, potentially there will be something natural that is happening there. And I think in some ways that's even cooler. You know, I just love a natural mystery. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
With summer winding down, it's the perfect time to refresh your style for fall. And Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead. Discover top brands like Free People, Favorite Daughter, Reformation, Mother, and Veronica Beard. Plus the latest trends, everyday essentials, and beauty must-haves you'll reach for again and again. It's easy too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today in stores and at Nordstrom.com.